Hello, GTM engineers. For people tuning in live, welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those watching this on YouTube or in the GTM community, hello. We're super happy to be live with Joe Rhew today. Joe, welcome to the GTM Eng workshop.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Excited to be here.
So this month, June, this coming month, we're focusing our content on MCP because it seems to be the next hot thing in GTM. And so there's a lot of us who've heard of it and who are wondering how to use this in our revenue stack, how to start deploying this. And because Joe has been speaking about this a little bit, I reached out to him saying, hey, why don't we jam together, tell the GTM Eng community what is MCP and how can we start leveraging it. So we've put together a little demo for you. We're going to pick Joe's brain on where he thinks this is going, how he's using it today, and so on and so forth. But before I dive into that, Joe, very quickly for the uninitiated, who is Joe? What does he do? And why are we speaking about MCP?
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. My name is Joe. I am the founder and CEO of the Workflow Company. You can think of us as a consultancy for AI native go-to-market automation. We like to call it GTM intelligence orchestration, but that's really just marketing lingo for doing a lot of GTM automations in sort of an AI native way. Uh, and we are talking about MCPs today because I think it's relatively new and there's a lot of resources on MCP. There's a lot of hype behind it, right? But there isn't a lot of specific use cases for MCPs in the go-to-market context. And so I want to start talking about it a little bit more to really get people excited about this in this community as well as in the broader GTM ecosystem. And hopefully this leads to a lot more MCP servers that are exciting for our specific use case in the go-to-market space.
Excellent. So I feel like a lot of people have that in mind. We have a growing number of people in the live room. Let's make us so right now. Why don't people in the audience tell us in the chat where they're from, sort of where they're calling in from, and what do they want to get out of this workshop? So instead of us talking to you like one way, we'll try and adapt what we say to what you're looking to get out of it. I see some familiar faces. I have Austin, Brandon, Charlie, Drew, Elliot, Hamed. I have Ez, I have Julien, I have Majestri. Maxence, obviously, is going to be keeping the Q&A busy with all his questions. Philip, Pinkesh, Robin, Sam. Okay, we have a few responses. We have someone, so Brandon from Knoxville, Tennessee. If I got that right. Drew from Colorado. Christian from South Africa. Robin from Germany. Robin wants to know how they can use MCP servers instead of hiring more GTM engineers. Interesting. Okay, Joe, let's park that one. Let's keep that for the third section. We have
Sounds
Iz
good.
from London, Sam from Barcelona, Rich from New York, Matt from Austin. So quite a few North American people. Hamid from Vancouver, David from New York, Tom from London, Mohammed from Singapore, Vincent from Paris. I'm guessing that's Vincent from Cobra. And if it is, then Vincent, we want some questions in the chat because I know you've been playing around with this. Sain from India, Joaquin from Nigeria. Perfect. So Sam wants to see some real life use cases. That's great because we have a few. If you have use cases that you already know you'd like to build, please put them in the chat because we did a little poll right before. We picked out some that were popular. If you haven't picked out ones that you want to have, maybe we can fit them in for a Q&A. So you just make sure you put them in the chat. Okay, Joe, shall we dig in?
Let's do it.
Let me give the audience a little bit of signposting as to what to expect. So I'm guessing most people know what an MCP is, but I mean, for one, I've heard the buzz. I would love a clear definition of what it means in like simple terms, and what does it mean for me as a GTM person. So we're going to talk about that. Secondly, yeah, this is cool new tech, but where do we put it in the organization? How do we use it? So Joe's going to give his opinion on how we should start using it inside our teams. Then we have some use cases we picked out for you. As I said, we're going to do a quick demo piece. So I'm going to show you how to set up a server, an MCP server in Cargo without having to write code. And we'll tell you in a second why that's interesting. Um, and then my favorite part, where does it go in the next 6 months? Because the space is new. What does it change? What should we expect? Voila. Joe, over to you. Please tell us in the simplest way possible, what is MCP?
Yeah. So let's see. I literally lifted this definition from the model context protocol dot I think IO website, which is the official website behind MCPs, and it's basically an open protocol that standardizes how apps provide context to LLMs, right? So if you've ever chatted with Claude or OpenAI before, you're like talking to it, you're telling it a lot of information about maybe your business or yourself or maybe the target prospect, right? What MCPs does is bring that context in without you having to necessarily communicate that manually to LLMs, right? So you might say, "Hey, Claude, look up this target prospect, right, and bring in all of their information, and let's chat about this person, right?" Instead of you having to say, "Hey, I'm trying to target, Tarek at Cargo, and he does this. His title is this. His professional experience. He's worked at this company and this company, and this company, right?" That's a lot of work. We can just bring all of that context in using MCPs. Um, so currently, the main use case is really just like an API gateway, and we'll go into this a little bit, I think, in the next slide. But it really just kind of standardizes how we and LLMs can send requests and receive responses from other tools that we might want to connect to.
Sweet. That's a pretty good definition. And so, for the next slide, before we dive in, maybe give us this example, Joe. So, a couple weeks ago, you posted a very nice video of you using MCPs for a real use case for the workflow company, right? In that context, tell us what are different components that make this up.
Yeah. So there's an MCP client and a server, but we'll talk about servers first right now, right? So a server, as of right now, there's like three components that can go into an MCP server. They are resources, prompts, and tools. And you'll see that I've highlighted tools here because that's sort of the main use case right now, and that's the use case that we'll go over today, right? But an MCP server can give the MCP client, and when I say the MCP client, I'm talking about any LLMs that you chat with, right? So like Claude, OpenAI, maybe Cursor if you're into coding or vibe coding, right? Um, but resources are basically any sort of sets of data that an MCP server can push towards the client. And then there's prompts, which I think could be very interesting, but aren't being explored actively right now, which is like context aware prompts that can bring in dynamic variables and then insert them into prompts. And then there's tools, which really are sort of your abstracted functions that the MCP server can run for you. So, using an example, right? I might say for resource, hey, bring in all of Tarek's professional experiences, right? And just give that to me in a JSON format. That might be a resource, right? A prompt might be, hey, given my business and what we do in terms of GTM intelligence orchestration, um, here is Tarek's professional experience. Let's write an outreach message that is dynamic based on Tarek's professional experience, and let's try to pitch our services to him, for example, right? And a tool might say, okay, we've written this message, right, based on the professional experiences that we've gathered. Now let's go find Tarek's email address because I don't know his email address. And the tool will just return that email address. And then I'm done, right? I have the email address, I have the message, I can just hit send, or I could even call like a Gmail MCP tool that will send that email automatically for me without me having to go into Gmail and click on send.
Very clear. And so I remember in terms of tools, in your video, you were using LinkedIn data, you were doing a bunch of cool stuff, and you mentioned that there's not that many sort of tools out there that you can connect your sort of like your MCP client to directly, which are publicly available. And so you actually coded some custom ones. What is that about? What are custom tools, and why did you need to do that?
Yeah. So I set up a custom server. Using TypeScript, and I hosted it remotely. And you're right. I gave it some tools, right, that I can call using a client, right. And the reason for that is because I find it a lot of work for me to manually find someone's LinkedIn URL, navigate to it, read their profile to like identify interesting information, copy that, bring that back into Claude, paste it into the text box, and say, "Hey, this is interesting about this person. Let's like let's cater our outreach message around this one specific thing that I found about this person." What if it could just like automate all of those steps, right? And that's sort of where the impetus for creating that custom server started from.
Got it. Got it. And so, sort of the rationale for this workshop as well was when we spoke with Joe, we said, hey, let's make it easier to make custom servers because there's a lot of GTMEs out there who could use MCPs, but they shouldn't be spending time on TypeScript and hosting it. And so, later in the workshop, we're going to show you how to set up your own custom MCP server and how to put in the tools that you use every day without having to write code. And then you can do what Joe does without having to write TypeScript.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly right. And if I may just add, I think everything's a trade-off, right? So I will say if you custom code something, right, that gives you full control over the code, how you want to do it, right? But we'll touch upon this later. A lot of the use case for MCP right now is like prototyping and shaping workflows using LLMs. And so if you want to get something quickly out the door, right, using a no-code, low-code tool like Cargo to quickly spin up a tool or an MCP server, test it, and then deploy it, and then decide to, if you want to custom code it down the road, you can do that. But it's a really good way to just get something out the door really quickly and ship quickly.
Very good. And for the people asking in the chat, I've just put in Joe's video, which actually is a really good resource if you want to see how to get started with MCPs straight away, and you see the genius behind the outputs. Unless there's any questions from the audience about this far, I want to come to the next step. So MCP is sexy, it's exciting, everyone is talking about it. But Joe, what does it really mean? What has really changed in the way we look at building workflows and tools for GTM? And secondly, like, do you have a good framework to tell us when should I use MCP or not?
Yeah, I think whenever you hear like acronyms that you don't fully understand initially, it just sounds really cool, and you're like, "Oh, that must be like cutting edge." But a lot of sort of critics or detractors of MCP say, "Hey, like we've been able to do this with custom GPTs for a very long time. Like we've been able to call tools in our AI LLM applications for a long time. Why is this a big deal, right?" And I think the big deal here is that it's a protocol, which means that if you set up an MCP server, right, uh, any client can call that MCP server. So it's sort of the ubiquity of being able to call an MCP server, myself or someone else, and anyone can use that MCP server, which makes it really cool. Whereas before, when we were writing custom tool calling code, it was only available to me. And in the specific way that I coded it, right? No one else had access to it. And so everyone had to write a lot of this like glue code that set up the infrastructure for hosting the tools, calling it, that was specific for only my use case, right? MCP now allows anyone to spin up an MCP server. And if you want to expose that server to anyone else can use that MCP server pretty quickly just by going into your Claude settings, right? And then pointing it to the MCP URL.
Very clear.
So that's what's exciting about MCPs. Let's talk about specifically MCPs in the context of GTM, because I think that's what's really interesting to me personally, right? And so Right now, in your sales org, let's say you might have full stack AEs, account managers, SDRs, or whatever, and they're doing a whole bunch of different tasks, right? They're doing account research, lead qualification, find their personal email, and all that stuff, right? Um, if they start using MCPs, what they can do is they can start calling. So they can start talking to their MCP client, which is their Claudes, OpenAIs, any chat interface that you use to talk to an LLM, right? And those clients can have access to MCP servers, which might have a whole host, an array of tools, resources, and prompts, right? And so you might, instead of, like I said, doing the manual work of navigating to someone's LinkedIn profile, looking that person up, figuring out an interesting angle to reach out to that person, you might literally just tell Claude, hey, go and fetch this person's recent post history to see if there's anything interesting that we can reach out about, right? And then Claude will call an MCP server and say, "Hey, use this tool to go and fetch all of this person's LinkedIn posts." And then LLM can do the heavy lifting of, okay, like I found one post that is really interesting. Maybe there's an angle for an outreach here because this person talked about doing everything manually in GTM, and Joe, you can reach out to them, offering to automate everything for them.
Very clear. And so the one thing that I want to sort of hammer in the point here is, let's say it is let's say an equivalent to your API gateways for exchanging information. I'm afraid a lot of the audience will tell themselves, "Hey, everything that was written in like API layer before, let's go and replace it with something in MCP and completely change the way my reps are accessing information and tools." Give us a good framework for when we should think MCP and when we should really not think to MCP and stick to what we already know.
Got it. Yeah, so this is I'm speaking like I have a feeling because MCP is so nascent, it literally just came onto the scene I think late last year, right? And it's just started blowing up probably in March, February. That's when I started really getting into it at least. Um, so it's really, really nascent. And so when we look back on this slide in literally like 2 months, we might be like, oh, what was I talking about? So with that caveat, I'll say right now in May 2025, I would propose using an MCP server if you're doing high value, really low volume bespoke tasks. So like deep research on a tier one account, for example, right? Like that's not something that you're going to repeat thousand, thousands of times, right? And so use an MCP server, take that conversational workflow, talk to an LLM, tell them to, really deeply research your 10 best customers, let's say, for example, right? The second part is if you have to bring in a lot of different contexts into the same chat, right? So you could imagine you might have connected to a ton of different MCP servers that maybe look at LinkedIn, that maybe look at your CRM, that maybe look at Gong, right? That maybe look at Clay, whatever it is, right? And you need to sort of stitch together all the different contexts about an account or a contact across all of those different apps, right? Using MCP servers, you can bring in all of those contexts into your chat window so that you don't have to manually go out and copy and paste or whatever you do, right? And then lastly, if you just want to abstract away all the complexities and all the granularities of setting up tools or whatever it is, right? Behind the simple sort of input output type of interface where you say, hey, get me the email address of this person, right? In reality, right, you probably have some complex waterfall that tries to find the person, right? Identify the person, go to the first email provider, try to find the email. If you can't, then you fall back to the second provider. And then once you get the email, you probably want to validate it to make sure that it's a valid email, right? All of that can be just abstracted by through an MCP where you can just say, give me an email address of Tarek. I get it back, and then I can just send an email to you right away without having to worry about all that complex stuff.
Sweet. And so, just in case anyone in the audience wants to challenge this framework or has a better one, please leave that in the chat. Very heuristically, Joe, from what you tell us, am I wrong in thinking a lot of these tasks will be either the experimental stuff a GTM engineer does, or sort of like the ad hoc sort of requests that they get from their team to generate a specific output to get 2 or 3 data sources together to get something out the door? Are we looking at those kinds of tasks specifically with this kind of application?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, right now, you could also imagine, like, I say high value, low volume, bespoke tasks, right? But there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to use an MCP server to actually do a high volume. So, like, let's, for example, say you do really deep research on your 100 best customers. Right now, um, we need to like call that MCP server, give it sort of the parameters for that deep research, wait for it to return uh, the result of that research, right? But let's say that you have connected to a Google Sheets MCP server. Now you could literally just tell the MCP server, do 100 times this research for my 100 best customers, and then just write that result into Google Sheets, for example, right? So, like, there's no reason why we couldn't do this in high volume. And that's why I keep hammering home the point that it's in May 2025 right now, where a lot of the use cases currently that we're seeing tend to be for those preliminary bespoke workflows that don't need to be scaled just yet. But as I said, I think there's a potential for doing a lot of high volume like that. Or you could even imagine in the near future bringing a lot of agents to start calling MCPs and doing all of that automatically and really scaling that process.
Very clear. And we have a section on how this space builds out, we think, or Joe thinks, in the next 6 months. Tom has an interesting point. Can we see a live example of you building out this MCP server, connecting it to a client, and running this for a fake prospect? We actually have a demo in store for you. So, Tom, if you bear with us for 3 or 4 more slides, we're going to show you Joe actually getting his hands on with a cargo server that we spun up yesterday and hashing out a use case. On the flip side, Joe, maybe let's talk about when not to use an MCP server. So what is very clear?
Yeah, yeah. So again, in May 2025, I would not use an MCP server if the workflows are super deterministic and repeatable, right? So if you have a very clear idea of almost like a logic branch of like do this, then if this condition is true, do this. If the condition is false, then do that or whatever, right? Like that's probably a lot more efficiently run through a regular workflow, right? That is very deterministic. So just do that. Or if the output needs sort of rigid, consistently formatted schemas, very clearly shaped schemas. Again, the beauty of using an MCP right now in your chat client is the ability to bring that context in and then chat about it with the LLM to further process that context, right? But if you just need a specifically shaped output, right? Again, just use a workflow, right? Like use cargo, code it, or whatever you do, right? Just use something else that's a lot more efficient. You don't need to sit there and chat with Claude for minutes on end to like get to the same output. And then
Very clear.
lastly, if the consequence is irreversible and could potentially be catastrophic. So, like for example, if you have an MCP server that for whatever reason has a tool called delete all CRM records, right? You accidentally tell your Claude client to say, "Hey, delete all contacts in my CRM, in my company's CRM," and it goes and does that, right? That's irreversible and catastrophic, and there isn't like a great set of UI that stops you from doing that just by saying it, just by typing that into your chat window. You could invoke something that is so catastrophic like that. So I would stay away from that as well.
It's basically the equivalent of giving your software engineer intern right access to the DB. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Except like not even a software engineer intern because they probably have some concept of it, right? It's
right.
like imagine yourself, right, in just like an airplane or something, right, and just pressing random buttons. Like you have the ability to do that. So
Yeah, and it's a very generalist tool, right? So it wouldn't know necessarily what is that important for you. to keep. Perfect. We have a question for Elliot. I think this will really drive the point home, Joe, if you allow me. When do MCPs replace what we usually dump under the umbrella term automation, zaps, and attends?
Yeah. Hmm. Think of think of MCPs as actually the individual nodes, right? So in a Zap or an N8N workflow or a Make workflow, you might have a node that connects to Google Sheets or a node that connects to LinkedIn or whatever, right? An individual MCP or an individual MCP tool is actually one of those nodes. Now, what's different is that instead of you having to manually trigger that workflow or schedule that workflow to run on a recurring basis every week or whatever, right? Now you can actually just tell AI to like trigger those nodes, right? And take it one step further, you can have sort of an autonomous agent start calling those nodes when they believe that it's the right time to do so. So that's the difference.
That's a very good metaphor, actually. And if I just drive the point further, in a typical workflow, you have nodes, and often you'll use branching logic, right? So if this happens to this, if that happens to something else, because MCPs have that context, you don't have to hard code those rules for which node to use when. It'll just have more intelligence to like drive the right node in the right direction. Correct, Joe?
That's correct. That's correct.
And I guess
Exactly.
the other difference can also be maybe the way these sort of nodes are triggered, right? Because MCP is a client, it's triggered by your chat. It's not necessarily going to be scanning your CRM or warehouse data. And if something else happens, then they'll trigger something else, correct?
That's right. It's not a set of deterministic nodes, right? So it's yeah, like visually, I would almost visualize it as like a hub and spoke model where you have the MCP client in the center as the hub, and then you have all these spokes of different MCP servers and tools that are all connected to the client. And the client can call a series of nodes, thereby creating almost like a sequential workflow. But it's not deterministic in the sense that you don't design that workflow from the get-go and say step A has to run first, then this tool has to be called, and this tool has to be called.
Very clear. I hope that answers your question, Elliot. And if it doesn't, leave us in the chat and we'll try to attack that again. Um, Thank you, Pinkesh, for the response. I think yeah, you're onto something there. Can we be as liberal with nodes, or will it get exponentially expensive? Says David. And so maybe I think what they're asking for is cost of compute or execution. Do you see this going, as in, is this going to be very expensive, or is this going to follow the LLM trend where it goes down to completely negligible?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about a different cost actually. I because that really just the compute costs depend on how often you use it, right? So if you don't use it as much, then you can create as many nodes. So it's really on the frequency of like how useful is it and how often do you use it. But I think the more interesting cost would be around if you equip an MCP server with almost too many tools. We're already seeing examples of where the client might not know what the right tool to call is, right? So the client might get overwhelmed if you create way too many different tools and servers, right? And so then you kind of run into this design architecture problem of, well, should we almost not expose the very granular tools and actually maybe wrap them in more of a workflow, right? Where you might be able to reduce the number of tools that you set up on the server, but a lot of the sort of modular tools get abstracted away into longer workflows that are still very useful.
Interesting. And there's a follow-up question I think is interesting to note. A lot of these workflow platforms have an AI, let's say, node or an AI layer, right? How should we see the difference between a person prompting their client for an MCP tool to be triggered versus that AI node managing workflow execution?
I don't know if I'm answering the question right, but like I've always thought, and I still believe that you never want to pass off any work to AI blindly, right? Like I am a huge proponent of always rolling out workflows with a human in the loop, at least initially, until you have ironed out all the edge cases, and then you can maybe start thinking about delegating the decision making process completely to an AI agent, right? And so, in that context, when you think about MCPs, it's really at the very beginning of like designing workflows and shaping what a set of steps might look like to do a job, and you have full control over what you do, right? And so you're able to sort of look at all the different edge cases, decide what MCP tool servers to call, and how to take sort of a set of steps to an ideal outcome that you're looking for, right? Whereas an AI agent, you're basically just blindly trusting that AI agent to do exactly what you want, right? But oftentimes they lack the context, or they lack the sort of decision making, matrix that you need in your day-to-day role, right? And so I would just always say, if you're 100% sure, like you know what you're doing, and it's always the same, is quite deterministic in terms of the outcome that you want, then maybe it's okay to go sort of with an AI agent. But if not, then maybe starting with an MCP could be a really good start for you to really fully understand all the edge cases.
In other words, you're sort of inserting yourself as a human in the loop in that chain of thoughts that agentic layer is doing, and so you're controlling the output to get to a better one. And so I link this question to Charlie's question, which I think is pretty interesting. Um, and I think this was visible in your video as well. So you're giving a lot of instructions on what kind of data to get for someone's LinkedIn, their post, whatever. Then you're giving a lot of instructions on like how to craft a message, the tones, what to focus on, blah blah blah. Are you already leveraging some sort of like chat memory to persist these prompts, this tone, etc.? How does that work? How does it get smarter the more I use my MCP client?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think every client currently has some sort of memory baked in, right? Like OpenAI has memory. I think Claude has it on a per chat basis, right? Every chat retains its memory and so on and so forth. I think we're going to quickly see. Um, I think we're already seeing certain tools come up that really support memory across clients. So whether you're coding in Cursor, or you're talking to Claude, or you're talking to OpenAI, what if there was like a memory, like a foundational memory layer that brought in your voice and tone into each client and into each project or in each chat you were having, right? So that you don't have to repeat this. Hey, like here are my example sample posts, like take the tone and voice from these sample posts, and then let's recreate the outreach message, right? So I think you're already, I'm already seeing, and I think it'll only increase over time, where there's an interest in this sort of foundational memory layer, where a tool allows you to basically take your memories, build upon your memories upon over time, and take them into any sort of chat window that you have across different clients.
Absolutely, and I guess that's where like you start building that advantage, right? Because over time, it's going to learn enough to like perform your task better and more efficiently than how it used to 6 months ago.
Yeah,
You get that baked-in advantage.
exactly, exactly.
Perfect. So I think it's time to delve into use cases. And so we picked out a few because that's what people, well, for two reasons. Number one, that those are the sort of the things that came up when I asked people what they're interested in Joe talking about. And secondly, the tools we're going to show you often use proprietary data. So either that's hidden behind some sort of auth wall like LinkedIn, or that's using a specific API like ocean.io, et cetera, et cetera. And so these tools are pretty interesting because you don't get that data off the web, which Claude can already access, but this is behind these auth and paywalls that you can access because let's say you have workflows or tools in Cargo that can actually talk to the services and get back responses. So, Joe, maybe very quickly tell us about the choice of these three use cases that we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, we have enrichment, prospecting, and research. Enrichment is simply just getting, the email of a person, right? Um, we say, hey, here's this person's name, their company. Go and get their email address. Prospecting, I think we used Ocean AI here, or sorry, Ocean IO here, where given the company, give me other companies that are lookalikes or are similar on a host of different dimensions to this company, so that we can reach out to them as well. And then lastly, research is around, fetching the latest LinkedIn posts of a person. Oftentimes, there's a lot of interesting nuggets of information in there that we can leverage in our outreach. And so we use this use case for research.
Very clear. And so these are very sort of simple tools that we spun up literally this week to show you how things work, right? We're going to show you how to set up a server, how to add tools that you already have and start using them in Cloud. What we're going to do this month is this is what we're calling Batch 8, which is a new concept we're introducing in the GTM community, is that all month we're going to be talking about MCPs. And so what I want from you people, the audience, is to keep feeding us ideas for more use cases so that we can build the tools that back them. And so every few days we want to release new tools that do more cool things. And then we put them in servers and everyone can sort of access them. And so what I'm offering for people who are already in the GTM Eng community, you know how this works. If you want to be part of this sort of initiative, we're going to be doing this all June. So if you want to be part of it, just ping me on the Slack. I'll put you in that dedicated channel. If you're not part of the GTM Eng community, you should join. And at the end of this workshop, I have a QR code for you to use to fill in that form so that you can join us and be part of this MCP themed month. And then we'll see how it goes. We have a hacker tool coming up on the 11th of June that I'm going to be announcing in Slack as well. So make sure you're tuned and you can participate in building these tools. Meanwhile, Joe, let's show people how it's set up.
Cool. So this is a really simple workflow. So let me just show you. Can everyone see my Claude window?
Yeah? I think we're good. Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to use Super Whisper because I talk faster than I can type. So I'm just going to say, hey, I want to find let's see. I want to find this person, Tariq Minas, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. I'll spell it for you down here. I want to find this person. This person works at a company called Cargo, and I want to get their LinkedIn posts. So I am just speaking to, and I'm going to say Tariq Min at Cargo. There we go. Let's see what happens. I haven't really tested this, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, cool. So perfect. So he says, I'll help you find Tariq Minas's LinkedIn post from Cargo. Let me search for their post using the information that you provided. And so this sort of user interface is showing us that it's using this tool called Retrieve Someone's LinkedIn Posts. And this is one of the tools that we set up on Cargo. And hopefully this will work and actually bring Tariq's most recent LinkedIn posts.
Indeed, Jared is right. The domain was wrong, but I think it was still robust enough to get back the actual Tariq. That looks like my post, yeah.
Amazing. So we'll say, hey, just can you give me his last 3 posts verbatim? Because see, they used the tool, right? Got all of the most recent LinkedIn posts, and then LLM was smart enough to like summarize it for me, right? But I actually just want to see what the last 3 posts were, just to confirm that we got the right person. Perfect. Yeah. So this is talking about this current session right now. Post 1, post 2. Yeah, this looks good, right? Okay, great. Let's also find Tariq's email address. So we'll say that because so I apologize for the typo there. And now it's going to go and find Tariq's email address. And again, I think the company domain is not correct, as you mentioned. And so we'll see if it finds it. It might not, right? And
which is also nice, right? So we can show how that human in the loop actually, like, you can insert that correction and then force the direction of the output to change.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, the beauty of being able to build your own MCPs is you're going to have a way that you like to work your workflows, right? For example, I might have created something where I say, hey, go find this person's email address. They work at Cargo. I can insert a step there where I do a Google search for a company named Cargo and try to find the right domain before passing that domain um, to find the email, right? So uh, this sort of using an MCP in chat allows me to see sort of the edge cases and then further refine and develop the MCP workflow so that if it fits my custom bespoke day-to-day workflow, and I can shape it however I want. But all that said, it still was able to find your email address, which is great. And I'll say something like, cool. Based on his recent LinkedIn posts, let's mimic Tariq's way of talking, his voice and tone, and let's write an outreach direct message on LinkedIn that's less than 50 words. And I want to pitch him on automating his outbound. Right. So now what I'm doing is I'm telling the LLM to basically take all of the context that we brought in by using MCP, and now let's write a somewhat compelling outreach message, right? So it has that fire emoji, Tarek, because I think you use fire emojis a lot. So like this
Right.
maybe either turns you off because you're like AI wrote this, or you're like, oh, I love fire emojis. Like this guy's legit. I don't know, but um, yeah, this is obviously I would read this and I'll further develop this and I'll say, hey, like let's take the emoji out. Like I don't use emojis in my messages or whatever it is, right? But you can see how in this short example we can kind of take all of these different contexts that we brought in and are able to quickly develop an outreach message that is hopefully somewhat relevant and catered specifically to a Tarek.
Absolutely. And so, Joe, maybe it's time, and I think from the questions I'm getting the sense, let's show people what's happening under the hood, right? And so,
Yeah.
if we go back to what Joe told us a while ago, this is an MCP client. So, this is Claude, right? And Joe is set up is connected to an MCP server that he spun up on Cargo. And in Cargo, he gave access to some tools, like tools that can get LinkedIn posts or tools that can get an email, stuff like that. And so now we give the instructions to the Cloud MCP client, and it goes into those tools and gets stuff out. If you want, Joe, maybe I should share my screen quickly
Yeah. Let's
and
do it.
show people how this works. Right. So for the people who were asking, if you wanted to try this out, you can just sign up for an account on Cargo from the website. It's free, and everyone has this feature called MCP Servers, right? And it's pretty easy. You'll be on your workspace home, and you can just go here and add an MCP server. So let's just create this one, and there you go. So your server now is set up. This is the endpoint that you're going to be using. And this is a token that you're going to be putting at the end of this endpoint. And then all you need to do is copy this over to Claude, where you can just paste all of this into what they call a custom integration. So you will just paste it here. And that's what I've done just before this workshop. And so that allows Claude to connect to this MCP server and the tools inside it. Now, what are those tools? If I go back to my Cargo, here there we have this concept called tools. So if you've been using Cargo, you know what that is. Very simply, it's a small workflow that does a certain number of things. And so what I've done, for example, is hooked up the find email tool to the server. I've also created a custom tool, and so it's called retrieve someone's LinkedIn posts, and that is now, if I press save, accessible to the server that I've just set up with Claude. And so then when I do go to Claude and I go to a chat, let's just say this one, I have access to Cargo as MCP server that I just created, and I have access to all these tools that I gave access to as well. And now I can give back this screen to Joe to show you how this works. Well, Joe, you have the screen.
Cool. Where are we? All right, Cargo demo. Great. I think we're almost up on time, so I want to maybe finish off by sharing sort of what I am excited about in terms of like what's coming down the pipeline potentially for MCPs. And then I don't know if folks can stay past 12:45. I can stay a little bit longer if there's any questions that we can take from the audience. How does that sound, Tarek?
Yeah, let's go.
Cool.
That sounds very, very good. Just to drive the point home, in case people missed the beginning of the show, um, what we just did there with those tools that you put into that custom server would usually have required maybe coding those tools like Joe did in TypeScript and then putting them into a server. Now because it's all low code, you can do this in a matter of minutes like we did before. So that's sort of the point of why we're demoing you this to you today. Back to you, Joe.
Great. Cool. So MCPs, what am I excited about in terms of future changes, right, in the space? The first is graduation from wrapping. So I think right now MCPs, people say they're simple API wrappers, they're simple function wrappers. You're basically just calling functions and APIs and tools. What is that? What's so cool about that, right? I think you're going to start seeing a lot more interesting usage of prompts and resources, and more clients that support prompts and resources. Currently, not every client like Claude and OpenAI and so on and so forth, not all of them support these different components of an MCP server. So we're going to start seeing that. And I think another thing that could be really interesting is like event-driven architecture, where what if we could have Claude initiate the message for when there's a strong signal that tells us, we should reach out to this person. Right now, we always have to start the chat, right? We have to say, hey, but what if Claude could start doing that, right? That is a little bit more event driven. I think that could be really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, the second is around client-side innovations. So, how can we go beyond text-based single-player communication? So the first is dynamic interfaces based on context. That screenshot at the bottom is an AI tool called Cove.ai, and I have no affiliation with them, but they do some really interesting AI native interfaces where you can literally chat to um, Cove, and then it generates like internal tools on the fly. What if you could have something like that where you start kind of talking about different signals or whatever, and starts pulling in all the signals in a tabular format or whatever it is, or Kanban or whatever it is. And that could be really interesting. Also, like, what does multiplayer mode look like? What if like multiple people could have access to the same chat window, right? What would the sort of Figma version of Claude look like, right? I think that could be
Hmm.
really interesting as well. Um, and then business model innovations. I used to work at Uber for a while, so like I'm always interested in marketplaces, and I think there's a lot of sort of opportunities for intermediaries and middle people to come in, right? So like there's already sort of registries and marketplaces of MCP servers, but none of them are doing a really good job of like actually vetting, reviewing, right, and matching. So what does that look like? Or what if the control actually accrues to the MCP client, kind of like an Apple's App Store, right? Where Apple controls the ecosystem of Apple manufactured devices, right? And they have control over the marketplace. Or what if the control sort of accrues to the server, where it's more like Shopify App Store? I think those are just kind of interesting business model innovations that people will start thinking about as more MCP servers spin up, and there's a need to be able to discover and find the right types of MCP servers. So that is it. Like I said, super excited about MCPs and the future of MCPs, and what Cargo is doing. I think is really getting you to prototype really quick MCP tools, spin them up, see if they're useful. If so, then you can build workflows on top of that. So I think this space is going to be really, really interesting. And if you want to chat about MCPs or anything with AI automation in the GTM space, feel free to connect with me. You can find my LinkedIn handle down there.
Perfect. And don't miss on this opportunity because Joe is one of the coolest dudes in GTM. And I set this workshop up literally by reaching out to him on LinkedIn. And so he does reply. Little plug on if you're new to Cargo. What we essentially do is we're a workbench for GTM engineers, right? So we think GTM engineering as a movement is going somewhere, and these GTM engineers need a place to test, play, and then scale those ideas, right? So that's why we ship tools like MCP, vector search tools, blah blah blah, so that these GTM engineers can get going and start building stuff. So if you want to know more about cargo, obviously there's Max in the chat. You can come speak to me or Aurelien, and we'll be happy to talk to you about what use cases you can build on cargo. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, we're building a GTM engineer community. We have a batch in June talking just about MCPs, and there's still time to join. And so you will find people like Joe and all the other cool people in GTM Eng there, and you pose your questions. We have events together. They actually participate and help you out. So don't miss this opportunity. Use this QR code to join, and you can still be in time for the MCP themed month. What I want to ask you as an audience is tell us which tools we should ship in this coming month, so that we can furnish your use cases that you want to build around MCPs. Um, Maxence, yes, you can join finally. And voila, that's the end of this workshop. Thank you for sticking with us. For people who came in live, thank you for your questions. I really enjoyed that. I think we got a good piece of content out there, Joe. For people tuning in async, thank you for listening in. If you have questions, come talk to us on Slack. If you're not in the Slack, come talk to us on LinkedIn. And we'll be back with a new workshop in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, any final words of wisdom, Joe, for our GTM engineers?
Oh man. No, not really. Just actually I'll say this space is moving so fast. And I always tell people I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just learning as I explore, right? And so to the extent possible, I know that it's not possible for everyone. Like try to carve out 10-20% of your weekly time always just to tinker, right? With no real sort of business objective, but just keep tinkering because this space, even for me, moves really, really quickly. And I have to remind myself that I have to just sit down and build workflows and code stuff to keep up. So to the extent possible, please do that.
Amen. I can get behind each of those words. Thank you so much, Joe. It was a real pleasure speaking about MCPs with you. If anything you've said gets proven wrong in the next 6 months, we're going to have you
It
back.
will. It will. It will for sure.
And we'll give you a new vision for MCP. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you soon. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.